So, ladies and gentlemen, let me welcome you to the United States Institute of Peace. We are very pleased to welcome you here this afternoon. My name is Bill Taylor. I'm the Executive Vice President here at the Institute of Peace. Very pleased to be able to co-host this with our Kurdish friends. We will have an opportunity to introduce everyone at the right time. The Kurdistan Regional Government Special Representative Bayan Sami Abdul Rahman is here and are co-hosting. And we also have the ambassador from Iraq, Ambassador Farid Yasseen. So, Ambassador, welcome. Glad to have you here. Both will have an opportunity to speak to you before the panel discussion. 3 years ago this month, ISIS targeted many of Iraq's minority groups, including Christians, Yazidis, Shabaks, Turkoman, and others in its assault on northern Iraq and the Nineveh Plain. ISIS also targeted Arabs and Kurds in many more areas. Last year, the Secretary of State and the US Congress, and just last week, the current administration, labeled as genocide the attacks on Yazidis, Christians, Assyrians, Chaldeans, and other groups by ISIS. So last administration, this administration are in agreement and have been very clear. Over the past 3 years, these communities have faced unspeakable atrocities, including mass murder, sexual enslavement, and torture. Through the efforts of the Iraqi government, the KRG, the US government, and the international community, important progress has been made. The liberation of the Nineveh Plain, Mosul, and other parts of Nineveh province are important accomplishments, essential steps in creating conditions for the religious minorities to be able to return home. However, despite these gains today, thousands remain displaced from their homes, and many have seen the ISIS assault exacerbate existing tensions between communities and exploit fissures between members of individual communities themselves, creating distrust, division, and insecurity. These groups, who not only suffered at the hands of ISIS, but under the rule of Saddam Hussein and from intermittent conflict with other Iraqis, continue to fight for their rights as citizens and work to ensure a safe future for all Iraqis. Over the years, the United States Institute of Peace has supported Iraqi minorities to advance their rights and emphasize the vital importance of their voices in local and national governance in ensuring fair representation, safety, and security for all Iraqis. The Institute works to find practical solutions for preventing and resolving violent conflict. This is what we do. We do this by working on the ground in Iraq and in other countries around the world with local partners so they can become catalysts for peace in their own communities. USIP has been in Iraq uninterrupted since 2003, with offices in Baghdad and Erbil. Our programs in Iraq focus on improving relations between and among local communities in various parts of Iraq, including areas recently liberated from ISIS, through dialogue, fostering inclusion, facilitating joint problem solving. USIP helped establish and continues to support the Alliance of Iraqi Minorities, a coalition of civil society organizations that provides a voice for minority groups and works on their behalf in practical terms. AIM was formed in 2011 and is made up of 13 non-governmental organizations working to advance the rights of Christians, Yazidis, Sabayan Mandaeans, Shabaks, Faili Kurds, Kakakis, and other communities. AIM also serves as a critical voice for Iraqi minorities to the international and Iraqi stakeholders, including the US government, the UN, the Iraqi and Kurdish regional governments. In 2014, AIM worked with the UN to convene a national conference on the rights of Iraqi minorities, which adopted a declaration on the basic rights and fundamental freedoms of Iraq's diverse minority communities, as well as a roadmap for implementation. Currently, the UN, in consultation with AIM, is supporting the drafting process of a law on equality and anti-discrimination in Iraq based on the roadmap and the 2014 Declaration of Principles. AIM has also supported initiatives by its members to respond to and raise awareness of humanitarian crisis in Iraqi minority communities following ISIS assault. Currently, the Alliance is working to promote the participatory budgeting initiatives in local communities to increase minority participation in decision-making at the provincial level in Nineveh, Erbil, and Duhok. USIP is also working to alleviate tensions between Christians and Shabaks in the Nineveh Plain through a series of dialogues informed by the findings of detailed assessments completed with the extensive input from both communities. In addition to the work of the Alliance of Iraqi Minorities, I also want to acknowledge that many organizations and activists, especially those who work in minority groups, too many to name, they have done commendable work to bring attention to the needs of minorities as well as needed support to address those needs. But we all know much more work needs to be done. This afternoon, we want to focus on the future. Our panel will discuss ways that the United States government, the Iraqi government, the KRG, and international actors can support minorities at this extraordinarily difficult time for all of these groups. This diverse set of speakers is here today to discuss some of the complex pieces involved in addressing the future of these communities, which form Iraq's unique historical and cultural mosaic in the Middle East. It's going to be an interesting conversation, absolutely necessary one at this critical time for minorities and all Iraqis. Before the panel discussion, as I mentioned, we will have remarks from the ambassador and the representative from both Iraq and the Kurdish Republic. And Ambassador Yasseen has served as Iraqi ambassador to the United States here in Washington since January. Prior to his tenure here, he served as Iraqi ambassador to France for 6 years and has held a number of positions in the government of Iraq. Please join me in welcoming Ambassador Yasseen to the podium.
The Kurdish Republic was in 1941. Representative of the Regional Government, which is part of the federal government of Iraq, and I welcome her. She is the daughter of a hero, and a hero in herself. This is a topic that is hard for me to talk about because I've lived it from afar, and when you live a tragedy from afar, you sometimes feel it even worse. And I have reasons to feel it more than others because my mother's from Mosul, and I have members of my family there. I remember in 2008, Eric Schmidt came to visit Baghdad, and he asked us, what is the worst thing that Saddam did? So some of us answered, it was the Anfal. Others said, no, it was the quelling of the uprising in 1991. I think the worst legacy of Saddam was that we had a choice of these things, which one to choose. If he had asked us that question in 2014 or 2015, we would have had one answer, what he did to the Yazidis. This was the worst thing that has happened in the 21st century so far. And I hope that it will be the last such event of its nature. And this is a sad thing because Iraq is a place of minorities. I mean, there's a good documentary running around based on the letters of Gertrude Bell. She gives a very vivid description of what she sees when she goes there. And it is really a concatenation of minorities, okay? Baghdad at the turn of the last century had a plurality of Jews. Who would have known that? Yet they have left their mark on the Iraqi state. And in fact, this is something that we have taken into account when the drafters of the Iraqi constitution in 2005 started working on their job. If you look at our preamble, the elements of plurality and the multiple nature of Iraq is imprinted there. So this is something we have to live with, and we have chosen as a result a federal structure that can bind us, yet take into account all our diversities. Iraq of 2017 is not the Iraq of 2014. The Iraqi army of 2017 is not the Iraqi army of 2014. The government's not the same. The people are not the same. I was recently at a workshop, at a conference in Aspen, where people talked about the relationships between the United States and America after 10 years of war. Well, I have to tell you that for me, the real war began in 2014. And its consequence was that it really brought all Iraqis together. I mean, one of the most emotionally charged images of this picture of this war, I remember, were Iraqi soldiers, Iraqi officers, Peshmerga officers, the Prime Minister, Mr. Masoud Barzani, standing side by side to work on liberating the rest of the areas that have been captured by ISIS. And it hasn't been easy. It is hard. And I have to tell you, I think the road ahead is even harder because we still haven't finished the liberation of Iraq. We still have to deal with Hawija, with Tal Afar, with Qaim, and then as ISIS morphs into a successor organization, probably something akin to Al-Qaeda in 2009, we'll have to still keep on fighting it, okay? And we have to stand together. But on the issues that we'll have to face, the issues that the ambassador just raised, on the status of where minorities are in Iraq. Simply put, for most Iraqis, and certainly for the Iraqi government, Iraq is not Iraq without its minorities. I mean, you know, we're not North Korea, okay? And their preservation and their active preservation as vibrant, participative members of society with their role intact and protected is vital, and it is recognized by the Constitution. And this is why we have parliamentarians representing minorities by constitutionally mandated law in Iraq. And I really have to give tribute to Vian Dakhil, who's standing here, who touched the conscience of the world entirely in 2014 when she raised the issue of her people, or our people, and forced us into action. And unfortunately, the world was kind of late. You know, had the international community intervened in 2014, I don't think we'll be there. So, as we move ahead, we will have to contend, like I said, with the liberation of the rest of Iraq. But then, and in parallel, and all of these elements are linked to each other, we'll have to carry out humanitarian work, we'll have to carry out stabilization work, which would enable people to go back to their homes and villages. And then we will have to engage in reconstruction. Stabilization and the humanitarian work is actually going on remarkably well. These are not my words. These are the words of the United Nations humanitarian coordinator in Iraq, Elise Grande, who's an incredible lady. She actually has recently in Washington stated that what is being done in Iraq is really an exemplar and a method and a model to be applied in later humanitarian action. One of the things she said that really affected me because, you know, for a very long part of its history, the first victims of the Iraqi army were the Iraqi people. She said that for the first time in her long experience of humanitarian work, had an army put into its strategic and tactical objectives and priorities the preservation of civilian life. That is really remarkable, and this is one of the reasons why I say that the Iraqi army of 2017 is not the Iraqi army of 2014. Anyway, we have to complete our stabilization of the liberated areas, and then we'll have to engage in reconstruction. And there, the demands are humongous. Nobody, I think, has really come up with a definitive figure. But I look forward to a pledging conference that our Kuwaiti neighbors are planning to hold beginning 2018 to try to help us do that. And we look beyond that to all our neighbors to chip in, because our stability and the well-being of Iraqis is part of the stability of the region. But then beyond that, we will have to look at the issues of governance. And for that, the trend of the politics that you see in Iraq and the intention of the government are quite distinct. First of all, there is a genuine will towards decentralization. Not only because it's the right thing to do, but also because it's the efficient thing to do. Nobody's governed better than when people govern themselves. And so this is what is in plan. We intend to have elections at the beginning of next year, maybe USIP, and I'm looking forward to you to send observers. I have to say that Iraq has two maybe contradictory expertises where they're the best in the region. One is its Iraqi counterterrorism service, special forces, and honestly, American officers have said this, not me. They're probably the best battle-hardened, and I have to give tribute to them because their casualty rate in these campaigns has been in excess of 30%, unheard of. But the other one is our electoral commissions. The elections in Iraq, and a lot of people have recognized this, have been fair and free, and with an outcome that is not always known, a rarity in the region, as a lot of people would say. So we'll have to deal with the issue of governance, and that will be done. But beyond all of this, I think one issue that is of prime importance for us to deal with is the issue of justice. People have been wronged, okay? And I remember Mr. Masoud Barzani came to visit France in August or September 2014, and I asked him what was the thing that was prime on his mind. And he said, the problem that I have is preventing young Yazidi men from seeking revenge. And God knows what happened to them. And that they were justified. But this is a prime thing that we have to deal with. And so this is one of the reasons I particularly commend the work that USIP has done to help prevent revenge-taking in Iraq. I signal particularly the work that you've done with regard to the Spiker massacre. But I have to note that there have been efforts, Iraqi efforts, geared towards this. Of particular note is a project by a parliament member from Mosul, I think her name is Farah Sarraj, who decided to look at what has been done in terms of reconciliation and conflict and means to establish social justice and social peace in the world, and came up with a plan, which I thought was brilliant and in need of support. So if there are any donors out there, please call her up. The idea was to go and canvass the cities that are liberated and to ask people what their grievances were. If, for example, they had been subjected to something grievous, rape, murder, worse than that, then they would be put on a judicial track. If it would be something else, like, I don't know, confiscation of property, then there'd be some compensatory mechanism. If not, then it's maybe some ombudsman or the kind of thing that USIP does well, with incentives to stay on that track. I thought, and then she went around and shopped her proposal around to various members of parliament from the province of Nineveh, which is the most diverse in Iraq. And she got an endorsement from all the women members of that government. So it's a woman-led effort, which I salute. I hasten to say that the Iraqi parliament has 25% of its members who are women. So that's one of them is right here. So transitional justice. It's not an easy thing to do. We'll need all your help to do that. But beyond that, we will need to heal the survivors. I mean, we will need a massive effort in psychological assistance. I think all Iraqis are subject to PTSD, myself included, with varying degrees, and I'm a mild form. So this is something that we need your help with. And if you allow me, I'm going to read to you something I wrote that the international community could do to help Iraq. Iraq needs the help of experienced human rights organizations, medical and legal associations, and donor agencies. Independent Iraqi human rights groups must be formed. These organizations should establish human rights centers in all major Iraqi cities. Processes and mechanisms for documentation and for identification of remains should be formulated and implemented. Iraqi lawyers should be trained in how to document and follow up on cases of disappearances. Iraqi judges should be trained in how to prosecute them. Iraqi psychologists and psychiatrists should learn how to counsel survivors. Iraqi doctors should be trained in how to identify human remains. And the Iraqi government should be helped to establish the institutional framework for all this to happen. And this can't happen without a concerted international effort. The sad thing is I wrote this in May 2003, okay, when those mass graves were discovered first. And we're still at point zero. And we have even more pressing cases for this. And as opposed to what happened earlier, now the wound is extremely raw. And if it's not dealt with very quickly, it will fester. And God guard us from that. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Yasseen. Our second speaker, Bayan Sami Abdul Rahman, has served as representative of the Kurdish Regional Government, I'll get this title right, of Iraq since 2015. Prior to her U.S. appointment in 2015, Ms. Abdul Rahman was the High Representative to the United Kingdom. She was also elected to the Leadership Council of the Kurdistan Democratic Party in 2010. Please welcome Representative Bayan Sami Abdul Rahman to the podium.
That was about. So, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Ambassador Taylor, Ambassador Yasseen, distinguished speakers, ladies and gentlemen. I'm pleased that the KRG has been able to partner with the US Institute for Peace in this discussion as we honor all those who were killed, raped, enslaved, injured, or in any way harmed by ISIS. We must never forget the crimes that ISIS committed 3 years ago when it rampaged across Iraq, and particularly on August 3rd, 2014, when it targeted Shingal or Sinjar and other parts of Nineveh. We must do all that we can to help the victims, to restore their homes and livelihoods, and bring to justice the criminals who committed those crimes. When ISIS struck, it hurt all the components that make up Iraq's mosaic. Not a single community was left unscathed. However, it is the minorities who bore the brunt, especially the Christians and Yazidis. The KRG has taken several steps. The Kurdistan Regional Government was the first government to recognize ISIS's crimes as genocide. In 2014, the KRG High Committee for Gaining International Recognition of ISIS Crimes submitted a genocide Article 15 communication to the International Criminal Court. In April 2015, sadly, the ICC prosecutor declined to formally open a preliminary examination into the situation. But we continue to encourage the United Nations, Iraq, and other member countries to open an investigation and create an international or hybrid tribunal. The KRG's Prime Minister, his office, and our security forces have helped rescue 3,092 Yazidis, but 3,325 remain in captivity. The KRG has opened a rape victim center in Duhok, possibly the first of its kind in Iraq, where medical, psychological, and social support is available to the victims of rape. We have protected and provided shelter for hundreds of thousands of Yazidis, Muslim Kurds, Arabs, and Turkomen in camps, and we have provided resources to Christian churches and communities who fled ISIS. Our Peshmerga forces have liberated thousands of square kilometers of territory once taken by ISIS. More than 1,750 Peshmerga have been killed, and close to 11,000 have been injured. Kurdistan has passed laws and includes articles in its draft constitution that protect the rights of all people of all faiths and backgrounds. But we recognize this is not enough. Even within Kurdistan, where the situation for communities is far better than in other parts of Iraq and the Middle East, we need to accept that society evolves and demands change. For example, we have a system of allocating a quota of seats to the minorities in the Kurdistan parliament. Some are calling for the allocation to be widened. This should be studied and carefully considered so that the inclusivity we are so proud of in Kurdistan is maintained and enhanced. This is just one example. What about the broader picture outside of Kurdistan, the rest of Iraq? What do we need to do to enable people to live a reasonable life? I don't speak of reinstating trust, since trust was lacking even before ISIS came and is now, I would argue, out of reach in the near future. It is more realistic to speak of security, stability, protection. The steps that need to be taken are many, and I echo some of the recommendations that His Excellency the Ambassador made. First, justice and accountability. We need the international community to step up and say never again, but not allow the perpetrators to escape justice. The government of Iraq should answer the call from other United Nations members and allow an investigation of ISIS's crimes. The KRG was the first to recognize these crimes against the Yazidis, Christians, and others as genocide, and we commend the government of the United States and others for doing the same. The question is whether we allow the recognition of genocide to be the only step or the first step towards justice. We also need to enhance security, engage in stabilization and reconstruction. We need the liberated areas to be decontaminated of mines and unexploded devices, and various local and foreign militias need to be removed so that communities can return to their homes. We need economic opportunities and development. Many of the disputed territories, including Shingal, were economically neglected before ISIS came. Now they are rubble, and practical solutions are needed to enable families to revive their farmlands, businesses, and professional practices. We need the international community to engage wholeheartedly in this effort. We cannot do it alone, neither the KRG nor the government of Iraq. We need legislation to bring about equal citizenship. We need to change laws that currently do not treat women and religious minorities as equal citizens. When the World Bank and the International Coalition speak about the economic empowerment of women in the reconstruction phase, one cannot help but be skeptical. A woman in Iraq lacks the basic right to pass on citizenship to her children. A Christian in Iraq whose Christian children of a father who converts to Islam or a mother who marries a Muslim are automatically Muslim. There is no choice. There are many laws that need to be changed to empower women, minorities. We need to consider local autonomy. Many of the communities in the Shingal area and Nineveh in general have called for their towns and areas to be protected and administered by their own communities. The KRG has and continues to support this. Even within the Kurdistan region, there are many who hope to have a much more decentralized system of governance in future. We need to build a true army for the whole of the country of Iraq. Iraq needs to build an army that truly reflects the makeup of the country and not just one component. The Iraqi military fought bravely in Mosul and defeated a determined enemy. If its reputation is to last, it must become a professional army made up of the many peoples and faiths that are encompassed in Iraq. In Kurdistan, we need to professionalize, train, and crucially equip the Peshmerga. When ISIS struck in 2014, the Peshmerga were outgunned. We were not able to protect our citizens or ourselves. We need to change that. We are working with the United States, Germany, and Britain to professionalize the Peshmerga, and we hope that eventually we will be able to consider their training and equipping in a different way. We need to reconsider education. Our children need to be educated in a way that we and our parents were not. Children need to learn about other religions, not only Islam. Education will also be one of the key components of countering radicalization. The KRG Prime Minister has instructed the Ministries of Education and Endowment and Religious Affairs to change the curriculum of our schools from Islamic studies to religious studies in schools across Kurdistan. In conclusion, ladies and gentlemen, no one can deny the fact that trust, if there was any, is now broken among the communities that used to live together in Shingal, in Mosul, and Nineveh prior to the ISIS onslaught. It's our shared responsibility to make a coordinated effort to pursue justice and accountability, to launch a reconciliation process, secure stability, provide economic opportunities, and encourage peaceful coexistence. We need to be realistic. The task at hand, as has already been stated, is immense and difficult. The wounds are very deep and raw. It's immensely painful to be betrayed by your neighbor, to have your loved ones raped, enslaved, killed, purely for their faith or their language or their background. Reconciliation and peaceful coexistence amongst different groups, even if possible, will be a long and painstaking process. There is no quick fix to implement. I look forward to the discussion that we will have today with the panel, and once again, I'd like to thank the USIP for organizing this event with us at a very timely moment. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Rahman, and we admire your poise in the face of that interruption. Good job to our security team for handling it for us. Now I'd like to welcome the distinguished panels to the stage. And Ms. Naomi Kikoler will be our moderator for today. She's the Deputy Director of the Simon Schultz Center for Prevention of Genocide at the U.S. Holocaust Museum. She will moderate and will introduce the panel. Please welcome the panel to the stage. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's a real honor to be here for this conversation. I think I would speak for all of us on the panel to say it's also a moment of considerable reflection and also humility, because we really should not be here for this conversation. We should not be here because 3 years ago, over 700,000 Iraqis, ethnic and religious minorities, were driven from their home by the Islamic State, many with only hours' notice, if even that, to leave their homes. As Ambassador Taylor mentioned, they were the victims of ethnic cleansing, of crimes against humanity, of genocide. Those communities should never have had to flee. We're here because of a collective international failure to protect them. We're here because that failure started not when the Islamic State arose, it started decades before. these communities have been in a situation of economic and political marginalization, of physical insecurity for decades. And I think part of the conversation today has to be incumbent on looking to the future and how we can ensure that those same communities are not targeted yet again, that they do have a place in the future of Iraq. And it's important not just because we as an international community have made a commitment to prevent genocide, to ensure that individuals are not the victims of atrocity crimes. We have a collective interest because these communities and their well-being is very much at the core of creating a stable Iraq and region. I'm hearing a little bit of back.
Yes, it is the Skype. If we can ask our panelist, Mr. William Warda, if you can mute your microphone, please.
Thank you. We're thrilled that William can join through Skype, so we'll hopefully be able to do it without too much of the background there. But I think part of this conversation is about ensuring that these communities are protected going forward, that they don't find themselves, as they have unfortunately in the past, as pawns in a greater political dispute about the future of Iraq, and trying to ensure that these communities that are displaced are able to return home. As many of you know, much of the territory has been liberated, yet these communities, Christians, Yazidis, and others have been unable, for the large part, to return home, both because of the destruction of the areas from which they come, but also because of the increased militarization of those areas and the lack of economic opportunities. Those are issues that we as an international community have a collective stake in and need to ensure that we remain engaged in building an environment by which these individuals and their communities can return home so that we do have a pluralistic and diverse Iraq going forward. It's a real honor to be able to be joined here by Vian Dakhil. Vian Dakhil, a current member of Iraq's parliament. Many of you know her, as Ambassador Taylor mentioned, because of her courageous stand that she took as her community was being victimized when she implored the Iraqi government and the international community to stop the genocide against the Yazidi people. We are joined by phone by a remarkable Iraqi human rights advocate, William Warda, who's the chairman of the board of directors of the Alliance of Iraqi Minorities. It's a network that represents Iraq's minorities, including Christians, Shabak, Sabian Mandaeans, Kakai, Baha'i, Faili Kurds, Yazidis, and non-minorities. We're also joined by Knox Thames, a wonderful advocate for these communities here in Washington, who I think deserves considerable credit for the work that he and his office has done to advocate on their behalf. He serves as a special advisor for religious minorities in the Near East and South Central Asia at the U.S. Department of State here in Washington, D.C. And finally, by Sarhang Hamsid, who many of you know, who is the director of the Middle East programs here at the U.S. Institute of Peace. He joined USIP in 2011, and I am a very strong supporter of the remarkable work that he and his team have been doing in terms of building reconciliation on the ground and trying to directly work with these communities to help them. To start this conversation, I wanted to ask you, Vian, if you could talk a little bit about what are the conditions and the needs that minority communities need to see in order to be able to return to their homes.
Okay, thank you very much. أنا من فيان داخل از أنظمة برلمان بغداد ما وأز تمثيل يزيديات كان.
Welcome everyone. My name is Vian Dakhil. I am a member of Iraqi parliament and I represent the Yazidi community.
أز بخش حال مزا أبرود الجل وأرون اجتماع كجلك يجرين جابو من بشتي صال إشهاتنا داعش صرت لتيم.
It's an honor and pleasure to be with you today, especially now it's the third anniversary of the brutal attack of my people.
بريسي صال وك أبرو ملتي من تصاغبون تباشبون تشتكي الونها أتبو.
3 years ago, my people were living their daily life with peace and harmony.
داعش هات أبهاري كاريا جينارت ما عربت سنة هاتن ظلامت ما كشتن قيشت ما برن زاروكت ما سربرين وأم درد بدر كرن.
But then suddenly this ISIL came, and the problem was they were neighbors. They were neighbors, Sunni Arabs. They came and killed the men, abducted women and enslaved them, and killed brutally the children and took them.
روجا أولي هزارو سيصد كسش إزديا كشتن.
The very first day, they killed 1,300 persons, Yazidi persons.
بشتي سي صالة مدو هزارو حفصدو بينجي يتيم هينا.
Now, after 3 years, we have 2,700 orphans,
شلوسي مقبرة جماعي
43 mass graves.
مزارة ميت رخاندن تشتكي لنها شيستو هشت مزارة ميت إزديا
We have all these holy shrines, 68, they attacked and destroyed all of them.
6400 هجدكس اشمرافاندن
They abducted 6,418 persons.
نو كما كاري ام 3054 شوان بقرينن بس ات هتانو كدستي وان ماينة 3306 كس هشتاج دستي داعش ماينة
We could rescue 3,054 persons of these, but still 3,360 persons are still imprisoned by ISIL and enslaved by ISIL.
هزارو شيست زارو كيت كتشكل عمرها 4 صال حتى 10 صال ايسس برن وتدريب كرن وكرنا داعش ونوكا او زارو كنافي خوش بير كرن لغتا خوش بير كرن نظانن داكو بابتوان كينا ونوكا او دفين بين ازديا ومسيحيا بكوجن.
They took 1,060 children. They took them, they were aged 4 to 10 years. They trained them, they converted them to Islam. They changed their languages, their faith. They don't even recognize their own parents. They are now training them to come and attack the Yazidis and Christians in the region.
نش سببكي بس چونك ام مختلفن القلوان القل عقيدوان.
It's just because of we have different faith.
وأس نظام تصو يعني سرچ أساسك هكا أز مختلف بم القل مجموعة كي بعقيداوي حقوي هي بيمن بكوجي.
I don't know what gives you the reason or the logic to kill me just because of my different faith.
هشتيو بنج الصدي إش قنديت ما شنغالي باشيكي شيخان همير وخاندن.
85% of our villages and cities, Shangal, Bashik and other cities have been totally destroyed and razed by us.
400,000 خلكي ميزدي نوكا بنابرن.
400,000 Yazidis has been displaced.
نو هات هزارش إزيت ما ولاتي خوهيلان وبرو أوروبا وأمريكا هاتن.
90,000 of them are now live overseas and they went to Europe and other countries.
ومجموعة ميزديا العراقي 500,000 بو.
While our population was 550,000 before ISIL comes.
أم همي دربة دربون.
We are all now displaced.
نو كام ما تشدفيش مجتمعي دولي بوما بكت.
Now, what are we asking the international community to do for our people?
أفخل كيما أبي هاتي همي محتاجة مساعدة وان بكنجارة كادي ببنى جيانا كينو.
All our people need relief, need help in order to begin a new life.
أم محتاجي مجتمعي دولي زمانكي بدأ تمام جارة كادي هو صاب سري منيتن.
We need the guarantees from international community that this will not happen again.
أم محتاجي مجتمعي دولي اعتراف بكأبي السرمهاتي genocide بو.
We need the international community and urge them to recognize, to label all these atrocities as genocide.
أم محتاجن أم قندت خو وشنغال ديسا أفادان كين.
We are in a very bad need to reconstruct our cities, Shangal and other cities.
بس هكا ما شنغال أفادان كرو خلكي ما بقران آية وبقرهن آية أوسي قطع اجدستي ما تشو القل جينارت ما أمي تشاوا بين جاركا دي آفاكين.
After rebuilding our cities and villages, Shangal and others, then we have to rebuild trust. How can we make this person to trust in his neighbor while he's been attacked before by him?
أزي تشاوا إزديكي قانع كم كشيستو هشت نفرش عائلاوي برن جناوي قيتشيتوي تعدلي كرن أزبيج مي ورا بقرة شنغالي وديسا القل جيناري خو رونها ومطمئن بجارك هذه هو صابتناكا.
And we know some of them were neighbors, so how can I convince this Yazidi man who lost 68 persons of his family, children and girls, who has been abducted and enslaved by ISIL and by these neighbors, how can I convince this man and tell him, come back and live again in your Yazidi area?
قالك زحمة بوما بو خلكي إزدي بو في اللهجي بو شبكجي أو تشتب سري مهاتي.
And of course, I know this happened to other minorities. And it's very difficult for everyone, for Yazidis, for Christians, and for Shabak.
بس هكا ما ببي أم الولايات خو بمينن لازمة أم دستي خو بدنا أوي دستي وان نبو خين نبو شبال نبو بخينا مو بأرزيمة.
But of course, we have to extend our hands for everyone who didn't has bloody hands and who didn't kill our people.
قضاء قالكي مهمة كأو تيرورست أو مجرم داعش جزاء بدن.
Justice is very important. All those ISIL people should be brought to justice.
بلام هكا مدفي أم بمينن لازم أم ديسا أو سلم المجتمعي أو تشتي حقيقته وثقة أم أبدان كينج برهندي أزال في دريمة دا أسبرس شوا بكم دعوا شوا بكم هاري كارياما بن دا مجتمعي خود ديسا أبدان كين نبس إزدي دا أم بيك فجيانا كي بكن نف إزديا ومسيحيا وبالصلمان أويت نلقى داعش بون.
So we have to build the social peace among all these people. So I'm here to ask you, and I'm here to urge you to help us in not just rebuilding our cities, but also rebuilding the social peace. And I'm not talking just for the Yazidis, but also for other victimized communities like Christians and Shabak.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Vian. Thank you for that. It was an incredibly powerful one reminder that the genocide is actually still going on for the over 3,000 women and children that are still being held by the Islamic State from your community, the Yazidi community, but also a call to action to ensure that we are investing in trying to provide physical protection, rebuilding your communities, allowing for trust. I think what we often forget is that the perpetrators of many of these atrocities were actually neighbors who turned on neighbors. And to create the conditions for people to return home and feel safe, we have to address that. But also to remind us of the fact that these minority communities, you said 550,000 Yazidis have had to flee. I know the Sembi and Mandaean community has gone from over 50,000 in 2003 down to 5,000 living in Iraq. Iraq's Christian community from 1.5 million down to 350,000, now all displaced. I think that's a very, very important thing for us to remember, just the sheer impact and scale that this has had and what it has meant for individuals in their own lives. William, you are working on these issues on a daily basis. I was wondering if you could share with us through Skype from Iraq, what are some of the top challenges that are facing your communities and others as they attempt to move forward? Hi, William, could you hear the question?
No, please repeat it again.
Yes. We were wondering if you could share with us some of the top challenges that your community and others are currently facing as they envision a future for them.
Yeah. First of all, thank you for your invitation and to share this event. Hello for everyone in the event, and for sure the issue of the minority is very critical, and this is very good to have an event in Washington to discuss the challenges and the future of the minorities in Iraq. So, I believe that minority in Iraq, they were not in the equation of the map, political map of Iraq. And I think now it's the time to think about minorities, and maybe one of the benefits of that is that the Daesh shed light on the issue of minority while they were neglected for decades. I think we have to focus on different files to speak about the settlement and political and security and even social settlement for the areas of minorities and also their future in Iraq. After Daesh, maybe I didn't hear all the speakers. Maybe they talked about what happened and the suffering, and they spoke about killing, kidnapping, deporting, everything happened against minorities. I don't like to mention all these things, but if we would like to speak about future, I think we have to think about 3-4 things very important. The first thing is the security file. How we secure those people, how we grant security for the people, and how to guarantee the secure return to them, to their land again, and not to repeat the atrocities, these atrocities against them. So also how to neutralize their areas from the conflict between the majorities, between Baghdad and Erbil, between neglecting from government of Mosul and the other majorities. This is very important, and how to protect their specificity, their identity. This is one. The second thing, how to fulfill the justice and to control those people. Now they are non-state actors and armed groups in their areas, and how to make them to involve in the security institutions, and to think who will control, who will guarantee the security in their area, whether it's central government or KRG, and this is questions. Sometimes when the majority of the minorities asking for protection, international protection, there is very misunderstanding from the government when, especially from Baghdad, when minorities asking to international protection. Some of them they are speaking about sovereignty and intervention, which is not, because I am specialist in the international relations. I know that if the state can ask from the international society for protection to help them to protect the area, whether they couldn't do, and there is a will from the government, but they couldn't fulfill and control these areas. So it is very important to ask for help from the international society to help. I think that Baghdad government and also KRG alone, they cannot control this area. There is a conflict. The minority are living in the dispute area. Who will find solution for these dispute area? When will happen that? The people, this is affecting for returning. People, they scare from returning because still their area is complex area. And also there is different kind of forces and with different resources. As we saw, political marja'iyat, some of them, they belong to Al-Hashid, some to KRG, some others, I don't know. So this kind of different forces and with different leadership and political loyalty, different political loyalty, that will making people scared of returning. This is another issue. The other issue, building a peace and reconciliation in that area. We are working with USIP especially to open the dialogue and to build peace in this area between Christian and Shabak, and also there is issue of legal reforms and how to help people to return safely to their areas and to build social cohesion. This is also subject. Who will do that and who will fulfill? The other issue is to reconstruct the infrastructure. So who will do that? And compensation, while the economic situation of Iraq is very bad now. And in this kind of situation, who will do the reconstruction, and in that area which is destroyed approximately some places about 80% are destroyed. So this is, and who will compensate those people in such bad economic situation of Iraq? I think this is kind of challenges. The other things, main things that we should speak about, building the trust between the people and their government, whether it's Baghdad government or Erbil government. This is one main issue, because those government, the people, they think that they didn't protect them. How we could help to return this kind of trust.
Thank you, William.
Also, the people, they don't lost the trust from both government. Also, they lost the trust from the Mosul government themselves. They are very far of the people, especially of minorities. They didn't take care. They don't worry about them. So this is many issues we should work on. We are trying to find a solution for that. Especially we were discussing these days about the issue of Shabak, how we could do to create an administrative unit, administrative places for them, like some Nahya, Qaba, these for Shabak, because Shabak areas, they were neglected, and there was problem between Shabak and Christians because the issue of the land and issue of this intervention between their lands, and this is the main issue that we should work, and the people, they are afraid of this situation, and the percentage of returnees is not that percentage that we were expecting, because now we are encouraging people to return. For example, Hamdaniya was about 6,000 families in Hamdaniya. Now 500 families return. And also this is, and now we should work on many issues, especially security is a very important issue, and also how to find solution for political issue, especially the conflict between Baghdad and Erbil.
William, thank you for that. I think you did a remarkable job of covering a lot of the challenges in detail, and I think that be fair to say we wish that we would be able to have you and Vian to share your experiences and your concerns more, because of course the power of hearing from the communities that are affected is so much more important than hearing from those of us that are removed from it. I think you highlighted a couple of points that are of critical importance and that we need to keep in mind here in Washington in our discussions about how to protect these communities. First and foremost, you underscored the importance of remembering that these communities are living primarily within Nineveh, an area that is contested by both Baghdad and Erbil, and that informs the sense of security or insecurity to a degree that many of these communities have faced. It also exacerbated their vulnerability when the Islamic State actually attacked. And from that, you talked about the importance of there being guarantees for physical protection, the need to rebuild trust, not just amongst neighbors, but also with the governments themselves that are responsible for providing resources and protecting communities, the importance of protecting identity, including legal reforms needed to ensure that people can move home and actually reclaim their properties, the need to ensure that one's identity is preserved, and that all of that is tied very much to the pursuit of accountability and justice and the need to build greater social cohesion. So I want to thank you for touching on a lot of those points, and I know that there will be questions, I'm sure, for you from the audience. Knox, all of that leads to a very important question around how we regard the protection of minority communities as part of being part of the national security conversation. And all too often, governments set their priorities, including what the strategy should be to fight the Islamic State or how we should be investing in rebuilding and stabilizing areas based on this perceived sense of what is part of our national security. And I'm curious, from your perspective, how does the US government understand these issues, and how is it integrated into thinking about what the strategy needs to be post-Mosul, post-Raqqa, for protecting these communities so that we're not here again in 10 years?
Well, thank you for that question, and thank you to USIP for hosting this important discussion on a week where we are pausing to remember those who fell to ISIS starting 3 years ago. And we're also remembering those who are still in ISIS captivity, those Yazidi women and children. But I think the point of our conversation today needs to be, while reflecting on the recent past, looking forward to think about what can we do as a government, as a community of values, to ensure that religious minorities have a future in their ancestral homeland in Iraq. So to your question, Naomi, these issues are really front and center with so many of the discussions that we're having at the State Department about the future of Iraq post-ISIS. You've seen Vice President Pence now on 2 occasions highlight that religious freedom will be a foreign policy priority of the Trump administration, and that our government will work to assist persecuted believers in the Middle East or anywhere around the world. We've seen President Trump highlight the vicious attacks that terrorists have perpetrated against Christians, Muslims, Jews, Hindus, and others just because they're the wrong faith. And of course, we've recognized the genocide that ISIS perpetrated against Yazidis and Christians and others, with the spokesperson saying last week that the secretary firmly believes that genocide happened. So the question is, what do we do? We're all in agreement that atrocities occurred. What can we do to ensure that future for minorities? It's going to be difficult. But we've got many lines of effort underway. The first is what we've heard from Vian and from William, is the issue of security. How do we empower minorities to play a role in providing their own security, to ensure that Yazidis and Christians are recruited and incorporated into the various police forces? There's the issue of ensuring equal treatment and the human rights of minorities as equal citizens. There's concerns about stabilization. What can we do to see that communities that ISIS destroyed are rebuilt and people can go home? But with this rebuilding of structures, there's also rebuilding of relationships. The question of reconciliation. How do we encourage communities to come back together, to re-knit those communal bonds that were ripped apart? And then, of course, there are the issues that all Iraqis want, an economy that works, education for children. And then the last element is what we've also heard from previous speakers, the questions of accountability. How do we make sure that those people who perpetrated unimaginable evils against innocents are held accountable? So this is, and I could go on, there are more issues to discuss, but these are the areas that we're pursuing. We're also not doing this alone. While the United States is a key, if not indispensable, player in Iraq, We're working very closely with the Iraqi government and the Kurdish Regional Government, and you heard the excellent presentations earlier. We're also working with our allies in the region, both through the Defeat ISIS coalition to help bring resources to meet the huge stabilization needs. And we're also working with our European friends and allies. We have specific multilateral engagements focused on promoting religious freedom around the world with our Canadian and European friends, but also working with, just most recently, the French and the Spanish to help focus international attention on the specific needs of minority communities, which are often, as we've heard, distinct from those of the majority. So I would just conclude by saying we're at a pivot point. There's a moment of great opportunity and a moment of great peril. With ISIS being pushed out, we have an opportunity to see conditions recreated where all of Iraq's minorities, Yazidis, Christians, different denominations, Assyrian, Chaldean, and others, Shabaks, Kakais, Biamandians, different denominations of Muslim communities can live together there to protect this beautiful diversity that once was. So we're certainly committed to doing everything we can in that regard at the State Department, but we also very much appreciate the partnerships we have represented in this room today. Thank you.
Thank you, Knox, for that. And I think, there are many things that you said that are important within that, but to underscore one, you mentioned about the conditions being recreated, and I think that anytime you speak with a member of a minority community in Iraq, they will start their conversation by saying that the attacks by ISIS was only the latest iteration of extremist attacks. And that for them, the reason they feel so insecure is because though we can defeat ISIS in Mosul and hopefully in Raqqa as well, they are waiting to see what will come next. And I think for the Yazidi community that's experienced already 74 genocides before, for the Christian community that has been persecuted over the last few decades, for other religious minorities, that is what informs their sense of insecurity. That's why they want to arm themselves. That's why they seek to create militias. That's why they want greater autonomy, because of that general sense of insecurity that comes from a history of knowing what has come before. And I think that that's also what makes it so incumbent that when we talk about the language of genocide or ethnic cleansing, that we are ensuring that there's actual action in accordance with that. If we're concerned about protecting these communities, we have to be investing in rebuilding Nineveh, in resolving the political disputes, in ensuring that the governance that is needed is there to protect those particular communities. That's what we should, I think, be talking about when we talk about the importance of talking about genocide and atrocities having been crimed. Is what are the obligations going forward to actually take care of these communities? And that leads me to a question for you, Sarhang, because for those of us who do engage the Hill and the administration, or we work a lot with foreign governments as well, what I'm concerned about is that there isn't enough attention on what needs to be done to invest in reconciliation, stabilization, what needs to be done to protect these communities. There's a sense of once we've fought the fight, the Iraqi government, the Kurdish Regional Government will be able to step in. And I think that what both Ambassador Yasseen and Representative Rahman had noted is their governments also face considerable challenges. And in the absence of the international community helping, these communities are going to be neglected perhaps again, or not get the level of attention and support that's needed. I'm wondering if you can talk about the work that you've been doing and how you make the case to those on the Hill, the administration, and others about the importance of supporting reconciliation work, building that trust again, and why that's very much part of trying to build a more stable Iraq and a more stable Nineveh as well.
Thank you. Thank you. This is the danger of going last. What do you say? Well, there's a lot, actually. Reconciliation is one of the concepts and words that I am glad that is being repeated more now, because 3 years ago that was seen more in the concept of the framework of Iraq, the top leaders. But today ISIS has changed that concept, and for many people, especially the minorities and others who have been the victims of genocide and mass atrocity and other crimes, they equate reconciliation with forgiveness. You forgive the perpetrators of the crime. which is not the case. So there are those who equate or sequence a reconciliation as a fluffy term that will come later after you have liberated the land, after people have gone home, after you have rebuilt, and then you worry about the relationships. And that is also not applicable in the context of Iraq, because as the other speakers eloquently spoke about, we can't go about that sequence. There are issues of the past, starting with Ambassador Yasseen, and then Ms. Rahman and the other speakers spoke about how these communities, okay, you go to speak about Saddam Hussein, you speak about ISIS, William spoke about Christian Shabak tensions. This is the reality of Iraq. We've been in Iraq since 2003, and we have been monitoring these things, and we've been working with them. But recently, we've also done a dedicated research where we asked, and we did this in partnership with the Middle East Research Institute, but also with our partners in Senate for Peacebuilding, a network of Iraqi facilitators, to ask the communities themselves, what do they see as a source of conflict in the future, and what does reconciliation mean to them? And this is where you go, that each community, each group within those communities, each political stream within those communities defines these issues differently, and they approach it in a different time scale. All of them, unanimously, the minorities will tell you, don't look at this problem just from the ISIS perspective. ISIS is just one of the many things that we suffer from. Yes, it may be the one that made news in the recent future, but you have to take a wider lens. And you have to look at this issue from two layers. There's a national layer, there's the Iraq layer, and I usually like metaphors. I see Iraq as a ship in a very turbulent sea that is heading for the cliffs when it's going for conflict, and it has many damages on that ship, and water is coming from many places, and you try to address all these issues. Focusing only on the minorities' issues in that picture will be just one that will not prevent the ship from sinking if we do not address the other part. So it is important to address the totality. That will be one of the biggest favors that the international community could do to help minorities, to help fix this bigger problem. On the minorities themselves, at the local level, there are specificities. Any community you take, there is at least about a dozen tensions and conflict layers that they will point out to you, whichever community that you point out. This is across the communities. For them, reconciliation is now, and to get back to what Ambassador Taylor said, that it's practical. There is nowhere near, or in no context that is more true than the context of the Iraqi minorities. When you say the international community supports you, say, okay, what are you doing practically? That's the question. That's what they're looking for. And they approach this from their needs. And sometimes those who talk to them do not see those needs, not because they do not value them, it's just because they are at different levels of seeing that problem. So practically, reconciliation, it's a loose term that for the minorities, at least in the first stage, would be for them to be able to go home. It touches on security. Will our neighbors attack us again? So to prevent that, there has to be not only protective measures of how do you put a security parameter around those minorities, but how do you work on that relationship where at least in the first stage, it's a non-violent coexistence. Second, how do you then build on that and you take it to a peaceful coexistence? And that is where, okay, you restore some trade, so some relationships, and there is no competition for resources, but there is a process. I know others go into the more looser terms of, okay, we are one Iraq, one citizen, the citizenship identity. These are all important within the context of the country, but for the wounds of those people, they think in practical terms. When I go through this checkpoint, whether it's a Peshmerga checkpoint, whether it's a Iraqi security checkpoint, or another group, am I being treated differently because who I am? That's the level of practicality that they think about. When money comes in to do reconstruction, Is it going to that village versus our village because of the tensions that we have? Is it going to the Shabak because there is a grand scheme of changing demographics by a regional neighbor? So it is very complex. Please be on the lookout for the research that will be coming out gradually. And if we want to enable those people to go home, we really invest in practical steps in the work of like the Alliance of the Iraqi Minorities. Participatory budgeting is what they do. For example, they have done, this is the role of civil society. They work with the Provincial Council in Erbil, in Duhok, and in Mosul about how to engage the community and get their needs and convey them to the government. Because of the lack of resources that was mentioned, tensions could come just from the fact who receives the assistance, not only dealing with the problem, who receives the assistance. So those community relationships could help prevent violence, help manage scarce resources, and prevent violence. And we have a number of flashpoints to look out. Bartilla has a flashpoint of Christian Shabak tensions. Karakosh could be a flashpoint, Christian tensions. Sinjar could be a flashpoint from actually an internationalized one, including Tal Afar, where you have the sensitivities between the minorities themselves. You have regional countries like Turkey, Iran, who have a stake in this. So this is where we have to really go for a nuanced approach, for practical steps, and reconciliation can help manage those conversations.
Thank you for this, Sarhang. I think it's just so critical to constantly be reminded of the complexity of the pre-existing tensions that were there even before ISIS came and how we need to be addressing them. That those tensions are within communities, between communities, even just within the minority communities as well. But that through investing in trying to do a mapping of them, identifying the flashpoints, investing resources, and coming up with strategies, we can actually de-escalate those tensions so they don't become flashpoints, and that we've at least got one level of protection for these particular communities. So just want to thank you for your incredible work that you have been doing, because I think it's one example of a very practical contribution that can be made. We have some time, thankfully, to open up to questions from the audience here. And I believe there are microphones on either side.
There are mic runners.
Okay, that's great. So there's two questions right away on the left, over there to the back and to the right. If I could ask the questions, if you could keep them quite short, and why don't we take two at a time? And just a reminder that William Warda is participating by Skype, so just if there's a specific question for him, please just also signal that. And William, I'll check with you if you've got comments you'd like to make.
Thank you. My name is Martin Umaran. I'm the president of the Assyrian American National Federation. I want to thank USIP for having this important event. But unfortunately, Mr. Warda wasn't here to represent the Assyrians in person. But my question is to Representative Bayan Rahman, if she can answer this. She spoke very eloquently about never again and equality for all. But my question is, why has the KRG forced the removal of an elected mayor of Al-Qush, a Syrian town, and replaced him with a KDP member who was not voted by the people? And after protests by our people for him to be reinstated, they initially replaced him with a Kurdish representative who wasn't a member of Al-Qush, wasn't representative of Al-Qush. Then they replaced him with another KDP member who was not voted by the people. So I'd like to ask her to respond to that removal, forced removal of him. And is this the plan to annex the Nineveh Plain into the KRG? Is this the first step? Should we be worried that other towns of Assyrians, because we've suffered 100 years of genocide. We continue to suffer a genocide, and our people are the indigenous people. We're a minority today, but we weren't. We were 7,000 years, and that is our ancestral homeland. That was Assyria. And today, we don't even have the Nineveh Plains that we're trying, our ancestral homelands that were destroyed by ISIS, and the antiquities and everything, and now force the final people to leave. So I'd like her to answer that. Thank you.
Thank you for that. I believe there was one more question in the back.
Hello, everyone. My name is Nawaf Ashur Haskan. I'm a Yazidi from Sinjar. I'm here, a fellow with National Endowment for Democracy. I was texting my friend to come to this event, but she just said, it will be another dog and pony show that we always be used to, with all respect, because I'm a Yazidi, I'm from Sinjar, I know what's going on, all those. But I mean, thank you for raising all the issues, Vian, Serhang, Bayan, everybody else. But my question is, how do you have, this question may go to next one too, to next too. So do you have any strategy when you can point it out that said, give people, young people like me, Yazidi young people, a hope that they will go back to? Because what I'm seeing, there is also injustice in applying the justice. Part of it is a corruption. I think William Warda is aware of that. Maybe 2 days ago, the head of the committee of documenting the genocide came out and said the whole process of documenting genocide is a total corrupt. So how can you do that? The other concern, I will say nobody raised that. How you will convince a young boy, Sunni Muslim young boy whose father joined ISIS, killed an ISIS, will stop thinking about his father. He was a hero and he was killed for a cause, not because let's betray his country. Thank you so much.
Thank you for those two questions. One was posed to someone who's not on the panel, but I'll just quickly check to see whether or not represented. Could a microphone be given to Representative Rahman? The question about political representation in areas that have been liberated.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the question. My understanding is that the mayor of Al-Kosh, who was removed by the local council. It wasn't a political party's decision, it was the council's decision. I also understand that there had been a long-running investigation into that mayor, and there had been protests against him. So this is my understanding of the situation there. More broadly, I would like to ask a question of this young man who rightly is very concerned for his people. If the Kurds, if the Kurdistan Regional Government, if the people of Kurdistan were so bad towards the Christians the way you describe, why is it that almost every Christian left in Iraq has taken shelter in Kurdistan? They haven't chosen to go elsewhere. They have chosen to go to Kurdistan. I'm not saying Kurdistan is perfect, but it's the safest place for your community, for other communities, and for many others. Even people who are Muslim feel safer in Kurdistan than they do elsewhere.
I think it's an important conversation, but I think that if we could get to the question that was asked afterwards, and then there are other questions as well.
Did not disarm the Assyrians. 2 years, 2 weeks prior to ISIS invasion, they would stay there.
Can I ask?
Not only on
if I can just quickly summarize,
we have a right to be there. That is our ancestral homeland.
Thank you for the point. I think we'd like.
That is our homeland.
I think you're underscoring something that's of critical importance.
Who the person is today. That is our ancestral homeland. We have a right to be there. Our people have a right.
I would like to ensure you have a very, very important.
We can have this conversation.
I think this is an important conversation, but I'd ask that we be able to move on to the next question and that be a future discussion.
Disarm anybody. They did not disarm the Assyrians. Nobody said this at the time. This is something that lobbyists in Washington are raising. This microphone is not working. It's working? Okay. Thank you very much for your comment. But I dispute every single word that you have said, and I'm happy to answer, but I think the conversation is bigger than your little, not your little, is bigger than the dispute that you're raising. There are Yazidis here, there are Shabaks, there are Turkoman. There are many Christians who disagree with you. The majority of Christians disagree with you. Please, let's let the others have the conversation.
You know, when I used to play water polo competitively, I never thought I would play the role of goalie, and I never wanted it because it was always the hardest position. Being a moderator of any discussion is hard, especially on issues like this. But I want to thank you for raising your concerns, and I want to thank also those who left earlier for expressing their concerns, because I think it is important to trying to identify and find a solution going forward to ensure that these communities are protected. They have legitimate concerns. There's no one voice that represents any particular community. There's no one voice that represents a Democrat or Republican situation in this country. So I want to thank you for expressing that. I think there was a very important question that also touched on how to create conditions for people to feel safe to return and also provide opportunities, and that was posed by our Yazidi colleague. I believe it was directed towards Sarhan.
Yeah, I think it's a great question, and a strategy to deal with that. It will have multifold. Some of the things require an international community support. Some of it require the Iraqi government support. Some of it require some decisions by the communities themselves. And through the work of USIP, I know that there are leaders in each community. They are trying to deal with those issues, and they are different. The context is different sometimes from one village to another. And to convince a young man to go home, it has several layers of that. And I have had some of those discussions. They do want to feel secure. So security is an important one. They want to provide their own security. So someone from, whether it's Al-Qosh or Bartilla or Taliskov or Sinjar, they want to provide their own security. They want to prevent what happened. And I think that's a right. That's an important point. And there are other actors in this conversation that may see that as a threat. So this is why a conversation is necessary to say, okay, how each community and how each actor, where you can deal with them, and you can address the mutual concerns and find a mechanism to deal with them. And to the question about if somebody whose father was killed or who was a hero to him from another community, with time I would have explained my ship imagery a little bit more, because for the minorities, ISIS came not from within their communities, it came from elsewhere. So to protect the minorities, you will have to put safeguards for preventing another ISIS to come again, from another force to emerge that will attack the minorities. That's a difficult conversation. As an institute, we are raising this issue. We are working on local reconciliation, and we have done this. We are working on Tal Afar right now. We are working on the Christian Shabak in Bartilla. We've done this we are working on Hawija and other places, but more needs to be done. It's a very, very legitimate question, and many actors are struggling with it. Unfortunately, there is no clear, crystal answer to that.
And I think we need to wrap up at that time. Is there time for one more question?
We can take
Okay, we'll take a few more questions then. This gentleman right here in the front. And there's a woman in the middle who is a black and white. Yes, thank you. Go ahead, sir.
Hello, yes, my name is Robert Amos, and in 2015, because of what I saw in the Yazidi community in Sinjar, I went to fight with the Kurds against ISIS. My basic question I have for you, and I really respect everything you've done in Iraq with the Yazidi community, but not all of the Yazidis that fled Sinjar fled to Iraq. My question is, a lot of them fled to Rojava in Syrian Kurdistan, and unfortunately, they don't have the services that are provided in Iraq. In fact, due to the blockade, a lot of needed humanitarian aid has not been brought to Camp Nowruz and other places like that, and they're still in horrible humanitarian condition. And my question to you is, what exactly have you done in Syria to help the community there that's still suffering and still does not have any relief from the situation? Thank you.
Vian, if we may just take one more question before. Thank you.
My name is Jolene Stickrath, and I'm asking this question from an American perspective, although I have worked in the Middle East. And I thank you all for having this, by the way. I think it's sorely needed. My question is what you just got through saying. You've got ISIS out of there. If there isn't some form of governance, we're going to be fighting them again and again and again. And my perspective on ISIS is just like any dictator or people that, like the Nazis that took over, it's not really about religion, it's about money and power. What is the Trump administration going to do to bring in some sort of governance where this will not happen again. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that question. Yeah?
Thank you. السوريا دو نوع ايش ازدي هينا عندك هينا ابي ايسس رافاندينا وبهرا بهتر السوريانا وخاصة الرقة وهينا الكامبا سوريانا وكامبا نوروز السوريا.
Thanks for your question. Yes, there are two types of, we have two different communities of Yazidis in Syria. One of them has been, the Yazidis people have been abducted by ISIL and took to Raqqa, and also those who fled the war and went to Camp Nowruz.
بوما هردوك خلكي منا ولازم أنبوان بشغلن.
And of course, both of them are our people, and we have to work to save both of them.
ازديد من دست داعش خاصة آفرت وقيتشت مان بازارك هيت فروشن وأمت كرن.
We know that there's a marketplace in Raqqa where Yazidi girls and women are sold. So we try to save them by selling them.
حكومتها هرما كردستان حتى يعني أسواظح بهم حكومتها هرما كردستان مساعدة مكر دا ازدياب بكرن يعني بداخوا حكومتها عراقي هتانو كخطوة أو نكر الفيكيشا في مسألة.
Kurdistan Regional Government (KRG) has helped us in selling these Yazidis people in these buying these Yazidis in the marketplace and saving them, but unfortunately, Iraqi government hasn't helped any in this regard.
I'm sorry, Ambassador. ولا مرة ما ساعدتونا نشتري.
I apologize to Your Excellency, Mr. Ambassador, that they didn't help us in buying these Yazidis.
ازديت كامبانا وروزي وقت ال 2014 ازدي رافان دركفتن الشنغالي هناكي بداية همي تشونا سوريا وشوي دري باقران بو كردستاني قالك شوان الكامبانا وروزي مان الويدري بوان باشتر بو بس نوكا قالك شوان ادفين دركفن بو اوروبا.
You are right. In 2014, when our people fled Shanghai, Yazidi people, most of them went to Rojava, to Syria, and then most of them came back to Kurdistan region, to Duhok, but some of them still left in Nowruz camp, and some of them left to Europe.
بومن روشا ازدي الهمية كامبا قالك محتاجة هاريكاريا.
Of course, you know that for me and for everyone, every Yazidi in every camp needs help, needs much help.
Thank you, though, for just highlighting the fact that there are large populations that are in Syria as well, and who've sought refuge and are outside the realm of also a lot of international assistance as well. Knox, would you be able to respond to the question about from the American perspective, what's being done?
We're taking actions on a number of different fronts. The overarching question we all need to ask ourselves is what drove Iraqis to support ISIS? There are issues of governance, respect for human rights, other complicating factors. I think right now we have a very good partner with the Prime Minister of Iraq, who's committed to, as we heard the ambassador say, to an agenda that is inclusive, that ensures all of Iraq's diverse components have a voice, have a role in their government. We've seen with the Iraqi security forces and their battle against ISIS a really remarkable commitment to civilian protection to ensure that in liberating areas they're not destroying the communities they're trying to save, so that they can be rebuilt and that they can have confidence in their government that's protecting them. There's also the question of how do we defeat the ideology of ISIS? How do we encourage those voices who say, no, this is not my faith, this is not the right way? How do we partner with them to see those perspectives amplified? Those are debates that Iraqis need to have, and we can't enter them, but we want to ensure that there is a framework where they can occur. But it's going to be difficult. The fight isn't over. We need to remember that as well. And we are committed, though, to continuing to partner with our Iraqi friends to help ensure that not only for the minorities, but for all Iraqis, that tomorrow is brighter than yesterday.
Thank you. I wanted to just very quickly see if, William, you wanted to respond to any of the questions and comments that have been made.
I would like to just to add something that is very important to think of the challenges now raised after Daesh, and also to think about how to find solutions. One of the main solution is how to find an solution for administrative issue in the area of Nineveh Plain and the area of minorities. This is a kind of challenge and a part of solution, and also to think about those forces now from different groups in Nineveh Plain, even they are part of Al-Hashd, but they have a different loyalty, political loyalty. I was thinking, and it's a kind of recommendation, how we could find another leadership for them, like there is a leadership operation for Nineveh. We can find a unified leadership for all these groups, whether they are Yazidis or Christian or Shabak, to find a unified leadership for them, like to be as an leadership of operation of Nineveh Plain. Otherwise, we will see conflict between these forces. A week ago, I was in the area. There was a touch and tension between two groups, Christian groups. This was expected because these forces are from different political loyalty. This is one of the problems that we will face. People now scared to return. We should work how to build peace in that area and how to reduce the tension between groups. That's what AIM and USIP is working, and we would like the international society and international organization to help people how to build peace in that area. Also, to urge the Iraqi government and KRG how to normalize this area from the tension between them. This is a very important issue that I would like to raise, because otherwise the people they don't like again to live in the crisis. They are very eager to see peace. That's why now, for example, in September, next September, people they should return, because here the government from Baghdad government will start the schools and all the administrative institutions function in the area, and any person and those officials will not return. Maybe he will face problems. Maybe he will fire from his position. So the people, they are now obliged as a kind of forcing people to return. So this is what affecting them, and even they are not convinced that to return because of this kind of conflict between the groups. This is what I would like to raise, is to urge the Iraqi government and KRG to support and help NGOs and help international organizations, and themselves they should work to build peace in this area, to enable people to return and live in peace.
Thank you so much, William. I think that is an appropriate place to perhaps start to kind of wrap up the conversation. I want to give an opportunity to Ambassador Yasseen and Representative Rahman to also potentially give comments, as I understand that there's a desire to do so, and in light of the conversation. So if I might just turn it over, if there could be a microphone given. Is the microphone working? I think it might not.
Hello? It's better. Thank you for comparing Iraq to a leaky ship in a storm. I've heard worse. In Aspen recently was compared to Humpty Dumpty. Okay. 2014, Michael Crowley had a cover page article in Time magazine entitled "The End of Iraq." Okay. One thing that people will be surprised by, and this is a prediction of mine, is that in a few years from now, people will start writing articles on the resiliency of Iraq, or how it'll have weathered the storm. And all this to say, what we achieved is nothing short of miraculous. You know, 3 years ago, we were worried. I mean, Baghdad was almost about to fall. Erbil was a stone's throw away from ISIS mortars. Yet here we are, we're closing in on them. And the objectives that we have is not to defeat ISIS, is to make sure that they are there and their like never rise again. And I want to close by one thing. Where's this young man who wanted to know what arguments I could give him to go back to Iraq? Could you raise your hand, please? Where are you? Don't fear fear, okay? There are many psychological barriers put against us to go back and help. One of the most heartwarming things that I've seen in the last 2-3 weeks was a conference organized by the World Bank on the reconstruction of liberated areas. And one of the things that, like I said, gave me a lot of hope was that a representative of Chaldean Americans who were very fortunate and very successful came to see him to see what they could do to help rebuild their ancestral areas. And I know there's a sizable and very powerful and very well and very capable Iraqi community in the United States. Think of what you can do to help us rebuild. Think of the villages where your grandparents came from. You yourself, sir, think what can you do? I mean, this has been said before. What can you do for the country of your parents and your country? Please come back and help us. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'd also like to thank USIP for hosting this. I think the nature of the discussion, some of which was heated, just reflects the problems that we face in Iraq, but it's good to have a conversation. That's where dialogue begins and long-term negotiations begin. I would like to remind everybody that the 3rd of August is the anniversary of the genocide of the Yazidis in Shingal. There will be a vigil outside the White House on the front, I think the North Lawn, it's called, at 8 p.m. I encourage all of you to come along. It's not organized by us, it's organized by the Free Yazidi Foundation. And I would encourage all of you to come and show solidarity with the Yazidis and others who've suffered genocide at the hands of ISIS. Thank you.
Thank you. I think just in maybe summing up, I'm going to just take a point that Ambassador Yasseen mentioned about resilience. And I think that in this particular context, as we approach August 3rd, and for those who aren't aware, August 3rd was when ISIS attacked first Sinjar, and then from Sinjar moved elsewhere into the Nineveh Plains and attacked Karakosh and other Christian communities. We could follow that as it was happening. We could follow it on social media, on Twitter, and see these communities being imperiled. These communities were calling for international assistance, and none was forthcoming. When it was, and the US government did do airstrikes, thousands of people's lives were saved, tens of thousands of people's lives were saved. The resilience that I'm marveled by is the resilience of these particular communities. The fact that they continue to try to seek ways to return home. The fact that they do have a desire to remain in their own countries. That's a resilience that we need to applaud, but it's a resilience that we need to do everything we can to support. And right now, I think, unfortunately, at times we are failing those particular communities. And we fail them when we don't also have the conversations about the realities of the situation on the ground, when we don't acknowledge the specific minutiae of the tensions that exist between different communities. And when we also ignore the fact that this particular community and these communities were made vulnerable in part by the fact that there is an ongoing political dispute that we need to seek a resolution to, and that these communities need to be very much at the fore of our thinking about what the future of Iraq strategy needs to be for the US government and others. Otherwise, we will be back here talking about genocide again in another decade, in a decade after that. And I would like to thank Ambassador Yasseen and also Representative Rahman for being here and for being open to these difficult conversations. And I hope that they will be able to continue and to be able to work with USIP on the remarkable work that they're doing on the ground, because these communities deserve much more than they're currently receiving in terms of support from the international community. So with that, I would just like to end by saying that these are very painful discussions. The crimes that happened were simply absolutely horrific. I'm the grandchild of Holocaust survivors. I cannot comprehend when talking to Christian, Shabak, Yazidi, and other colleagues what they've had to endure. Those wounds do fester if they are not addressed, and we need to do everything we can to address the concerns of those who are raised here and those that were expressed through the phone from our colleague William Warda, who was calling us from Iraq. So a very, very sincere thank you to everyone for participating, and may we hopefully not have to be here again in the future talking about Iraq and genocide in the future. Thank you.